Welcome to Bucky's Guided Pagan Journey. This podcast is designed so I can walk with everybody through understanding and figuring out what spiritualism is and how spiritualism affects our lives and how we can figure out our own way and our own path. If you have any questions, please shoot me a message and enjoy listening. So if you remember from last week, we were talking about that aha moment of enlightenment, when all of a sudden the great veil of the universe is peeled back and there you are in awe and wonder of what a way to interrogate this truth and come out to a proper conclusion. So it's time for a little bit of a story just to reinforce that. As a number of other psychic readers do, I like to go to other places where tarot is offered and card readings are offered and just sit and enjoy listening. And the energy there is always great. It's always good to go to the places where people are starting to tap into either the Akashic plane or into the universal energies of throwing cards. So I went to a place where they did that, and I sat there reading a book, drinking some tea. One of my favorite things to do is to take a paper napkin, and fold it into a rose. Well, in this place, I folded it into a rose, and it was actually a pretty good rose. But I didn't have anyone to give it to, so I decided, hey, this giant statue of Vishnu, I think, needs a rose. So I put a white rose on the statue of Vishnu. Very innocent and non-spiritual gesture, just me folding up a rose and having no one to give it to. Well, about a week later, I get a message from somebody I know from that inner group saying, you got to be very careful there because they thought that you wanted to kill Vishnu and screw their mojo up. Well, unfortunately, their subjective truth was not really objective. They didn't interrogate the evidence properly to come to a decent conclusion, and alienated somebody. So the word of the day for that is epistemology. So epistemology is kind of the investigation of distinguishes justifiable thought and belief from opinion, and is kind of the watchword for truth. If what you are saying is true in that moment, but does not withstand the scrutiny of time, then it's not really true. So how does this apply to us? How does this really apply to us on our adventure into this crazy mythical world? Well, we will have people tell us something. We will have people say things about us in regards to prophecy or card reading. But there's this very important element of discerning what's going on. And I'll explain how discernment works, especially when it comes to world of prophecy, oracles, and spirits, and post-enlightenment. But before we get to the discernment stage, I wanted to talk to you about doctrine as it relies on the objective truth that we just discussed. Now, the way that doctrine operates is it's a set of beliefs that are held to be true through the epistemological process. So, what that means is that a group of people can see the truth behind that as it is evident. Now, if you are a Wiccan, one of your doctrinal truths is that you should align your altar with north when you cast a circle, right? That truth can be interrogated later on, but if it is found incorrect, then that doctrinal belief has to kind of shift with it. So as you're moving along and filling in your book of shadows and you find your truths and you start documenting them down, always question your doctrines and figure out what is right and what is not. And now we move on to dogma, which is the yin to the doctrine yang. So dogma is a set of principles laid down by individuals in a place of authority. Now, dogma is kind of the evil sister to doctrine. Whereas doctrine tells us that we can change and develop and grow our own understanding, dogma tells us that if we go against this, then we go against the universal principles held by the organization. And that's kind of where religions become strenuous, cults become strenuous, and belief systems become stagnant. If you find yourself in a dogmatic position, perhaps you should reevaluate the truth that you're finding. So, not to mean to be mildly greedy and bring this back to what I do, tarot readings. If we look at the Hierophant card, that really applies to doctrine and dogma. We have the two pillars and the two priests sitting below the Pope on the Rider's Waite deck. Every other deck has it differently. And this kind of refers to how we take our spiritual journey and how we discipline it into an understanding and subjugate it so that we don't lose our minds. We have to remember that when we open up our heads to universal energy, there's more universal energy than our head, and it can flood in, and we can lose everything. So we organize the knowledge that we have through doctrine and dogma through the epistemological lens to make sense of it all. And that, in a sense, is how we find the elements of our truth. Fear not, I did not forget about discernment. So all of a sudden, you're in a group of people and you're learning how to meditate. And one person claims to be the grand central yogi of a very specific history or path, and says that he's the only one who's attuned because his teachers and his teachers' teachers were attuned, and he calls you heretical for thinking elsewise. Well, you ask immediately for the evidence to support that, because there's has to be some sort of level to the truth, and there's none. You have to take it at face value. Well, you can choose to take it at face value. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that if you intuitively feel it to be correct. What that means is if your stomach is telling you this guy seems legit, you could give it a try, but grip onto it loosely. Because the reality is he could be a snake salesman coming in from the coast to sell you some great snake oil that'll cure all your ills, but it ends up being just a good old can of water. The other element behind this as well is when someone says that this is thus and thus is so and claims to have evidence and history to it, ask to see the evidence. There's absolutely nothing wrong with taking their subjective personal truth and throwing a lens of scrutiny to it, to ensure that the information that you're receiving is correct before you apply it into your Rolodex. I think my favorite examples of this would be in Reiki. Reiki is phenomenal. It's an amazing form of energy healing. And I hope to get a Reiki person here interviewed sometime soon. However, there are some people who will claim that other forms of Reiki aren't true because they were not attuned this certain way or by that certain person. And it develops a lot of elitism. But I guess the question is, does it work? Is there successes to it? You got to ask these questions, because sometimes it's just a lot of ego getting in the way. The second form of discernment is extremely important to remember if you are seeing a medium or a card reader or a rune caster or any divinator at all. What you're going to encounter is messages that are going to come through. They're going to tell you, you need to break up with your significant other, or you need to pack your bags and move to a different part of the country. That may well be. I've had readings where I've told people that they need to consider perhaps leaving their job or breaking up with their abusive spouse. Don't take that as your move action word, your call to action. Take that information and throw it into the rule of threes. And this is something that I kind of made up, but I don't know if anyone else uses it. The rule of threes operates as this. If you hear from a psychic divinator that you need to quit your job, put that in your mind. Now, if you're getting a synchristic inclination by somebody walking up and saying, hey man, you're getting treated like shit at work, maybe you should quit your job. That's number two. Then you get home and your significant other says, hon, I just got a raise and your job, you're always miserable at it. Maybe you should consider leaving it. Well, now you got three people telling you. You got three synchronistic events affirming that situation. And that would put you in a position where you should probably see that as a psychic answer to a question. And that's how you discern things on what I would call a woo level. You've probably heard me say woo a few times. Woo and mojo. There's certain things that I can't really generate words for. Woo would be like mysticism, I guess. But that's how you would decipher those sorts of things. Here we are. We've came this far. We've had a crazy revelation that smashed our faces wide open and our third eye shone through like the sun. We found ourselves terrified at the amount of power that's actually truly around us. And we staved off our insanity. Thank you very much, Mr. Carl Jung. You're a wonderful guy. We found out how to weigh the truth and try and figure out what is truth and what is not truth, and develop our own systems of belief, pathways of belief, and we're starting to develop our own doctrinal path at the same time as discerning when people tell us certain psychic things and telling when it's time to tell somebody to frankly fuck off. Now we are at an interesting final stage. 2 pitfalls of the Enlightened. Now, the first pitfall is a very, very easy one. That's a sad one for me because I've seen it before, where an individual is enlightened and they have a phenomenal gift, just unbelievable, and they don't use it. They'll use it a couple times here and there, and then all of a sudden they'll stop. And they're taking a great gift and they're locking it away. They're putting it into a chamber and they're not sharing it with the world. And that is more of a travesty for everyone around them, not for them. And if you find yourself in a position where you're doing that, give your head a shake, unlock the door, share the gifts that you have. If you don't, then it may come back and bite you in the shadow realm of Young and Shadow, that is. The second one kind of is the opposite. It's where you think that you have more woo and more energy than you actually do, and you go out and you start using charismatic speeches and developing teams and start moving things, but you're kind of fake, building it off of a fake foundation. You're literally a toddler with a flamethrower, and you're shooting flame in every direction and burning everyone around you, and they are so foolish to come up to you and get burned because you're so damn good at talking. And you can't figure out why everyone else is around you is being burned. Well, it's because you're trying to use teaching methods such as tarot cards or rune reading, or you're trying to be more than you actually are, and you're inflicting damage on everybody else around you. And that's the extreme opposite. So when you go on your journey, make sure you A, stay on the journey, and B, learn how to walk before you can run. And that's the best pieces of advice I can probably give in regards to that. And that concludes another episode of Bucky's Pagan Guided Adventures. Please shoot me a message if you want to cover some sort of a topic here on my good old podcast. And if you think you want to do an interview, please shoot me a message as well. Maybe I can get somebody on here to chitty chat. I'm totally cool with that too. You can find me on Facebook at Tarot, a capital T, Bye with a capital B, Bucky with a capital B. And we hope to see you next time. Have a good week.